Corporate Storytellers Club podcast, the place for ideas on how to find, how to hone and share stories that ignite and inspire. How can changing your stories have a profound effect on the future that you achieve, both for you and for others? I am delighted to be joined today by a fellow professional speaker and author of many books, including The Goal Getter. It's Gerry Duffy, a man who once ran 32 marathons in 32 days and is a former winner of the Deca Iron Distance Triathlon. So I gather the toughest 10-day endurance challenge in the world. I'm exhausted just thinking about that, Gerry. How are you, Gerry?
I'm wonderful, Eamonn, and thanks for having me on your show.
So you're a man who helps people to set new courses that, I suppose, push their boundaries and open their eyes to new possibilities. Why do you think stories are so important in terms of defining who we are and what we believe we can achieve?
Well, I think we're always in a story in our minds. We're always in a story in our lives, whether we realize it or not. Everything is a story. So a simple example, we're playing in a football game, and 10 minutes into the game, the opposition, we're heavy favourites to win it. The bookies won't even take money on us because we're so strong. But then the opposition scores a goal. And then we go into story mode. Oh, this is not what we planned. This player, this team are better than us. Now there's a story going on in our heads. It's a completely different story to the one that was going on in our heads just 5 seconds earlier. So, Eamonn, in my opinion, we're always in story mode. There's always something that we're thinking that is our story at that moment in time.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I like the notion of, you're in a football game and you're 10 minutes in and all of a sudden, momentum goes up or down and it affects your mood. What is it that you think that you've learned over the years about when and why people apply brakes where they say this story, no further?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know myself, just my own story. And sometimes, Sometimes it's not by having a radical transformation. Sometimes just even 1 degree of a different change can lead you into a completely different story over a period of time. I know myself, I had a story going on at the age of 27, up to the age of 27, which was I'm educated to this certain level. I'm able to earn money at this certain level. I'm only able to achieve these number of things in my life. A very simple thing happened at the age of 27. I had a photograph taken and I didn't like myself in the photograph. So as a result of the photograph, I just made a simple decision just to do something different, within a couple of days, which was to buy a pair of running shoes. And instead of being very unfit, I said, no, I'm going to try and get fit. And over time, if I'm being honest, that was the limit of the vision that I had at that time in my life. But over the next couple of years, my story began to just change by tiny incremental amounts. And the key word there maybe is incremental. There's a quote I love, which is, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you.
Oh, I love that. If it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you.
Yeah, and if I'm being honest, I didn't want to give up cigarettes. I love cigarettes, but I said, no, I want to give up cigarettes. So it hugely challenged me to give up cigarettes. I did want to get fit, but I mightn't have wanted to do the exercise that was around it. But I encouraged myself into doing it. And because these two things challenged me, they changed me. They changed me physically. They changed my psychology to the point that I started to write a new story in my late 20s and into my early 30s. And I just kept challenging myself just to keep just going to a couple of percentage points higher in everything that I did. So raise my food standards a tiny bit higher, raise my fitness a little bit higher, get back into education. And as a consequence, my confidence and my psychology went along for the ride. It went to higher levels. And I began to see a different story for myself that possibly was there for me to attain, that the older me, or the younger me, wouldn't have actually seen.
Yeah. I love that. And you used a really interesting word just a wee while back when you were talking about the limits. And obviously you found a way to get past that. But can you put your finger on what was it that encouraged you to think, actually, there's something really powerful in this. I need to share that with other people.
Yeah, I guess I just seen, there's nothing like, if we want to be a more confident swimmer, there's nothing like getting into the swim pool. It's very unlikely we're going to become a more confident swimmer by standing on the side of the pool. And I guess because I was now in this, doing these things, I was experiencing experiencing them for myself. I was experiencing the growth for myself. I was starting to achieve things at a much higher level than I could have envisaged before. Well, I knew I was just doing very simple things, but I just raised my standards in these things. And I began to share that with other people. And I guess in many ways it was a 15 or a 16 year kind of collection before I start to realize, well, maybe that this might be of value to other people. And that's how I ended up getting into the business that I'm in now, where I began to see what value I could bring, what I'd learned, and just to share that in a setting where I was now teaching people the things that I've been lucky enough to learn.
Yeah, no, and actually, I mentioned you before the interview that I remembered listening to you when we were in Cong in Galway. Actually, is it Galway or Mayo?
Oh, I think it's in County Galway, yes.
In County Galway, yeah. But anyway, Cong is, there was an unconference there, and Cong, for those of you who can remember back this far, and there's less and less of us, was the place where it was the setting for The Quiet Man, which was my American Irish father-in-law's favourite movie. It's terribly corny, but it's a gorgeous place to visit. But anyway, I just remember you were talking about advice on things that people can do to reframe the future. And if you were giving people 2 or 3 kind of quick start insights into how to start to just change things in an easy fashion, where would you point people?
Sure. A couple of things come into mind, Eamonn. One is I was fortunate to secure a contract with a client to do a work on a certain number of occasions this year, and they scheduled me for 4 work engagements. And I thought, gosh, this is wonderful. And then we did that, and I thought, wow, that was brilliant. Then they scheduled me for another 4, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And then about 3 weeks later, before we started the work, they actually cancelled 2 of the talks. And I thought, poor me. This is terrible. Oh my gosh, this is going to affect my business. But then I caught myself, Eamonn, and I said, hang on a second now. What are you doing? What story are you telling yourself here? Because at the beginning of this year, you were thrilled with 4 engagements. Now you have 6. And I realized it's just a story going on in my head. And I realized I needed to see this differently. And so it was wonderful. And I think it starts with that awareness, Eamonn. You know, if we find ourselves stuck in something, the very first thing, and I didn't do this for years, but now I've become very aware, very consciously aware of who I am and what I might be telling myself. Just yesterday, I was due to speak with work with a client from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and I was under a little bit of pressure to leave at 5 o'clock to be somewhere else. And at 3:15, I'm still waiting to be invited in by my client. 3:20, still waiting there, and I found myself getting a little bit agitated by this. And then I became very aware, and I said, hang on now, Gerry, you teach this stuff, your emotional state here. I said, you can reframe this any way you want. So I just reframed it and hang on now, how lucky am I to have work here? And listen, me getting upset about this, that's not going to make them come out and bring me into the room any quicker. So it's just, Daniel Kahneman is a man who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Ah, yeah, great book.
Great book. And he talks about 2 different types of thinking that we do. So let me explain why I'm bringing this up now. If somebody listening to this has a story going on in their head, so a simple example, people in January, you go into a coffee shop, people are talking about, this is going to be my year, I'm going to get the dream job, I'm going to lose the weight, I'm going to travel the world. And we go back a year later, we hear the same things. It's never going to change until a couple of basic fundamentals happen. Number one is that we step out of ourselves and we elevate our thinking to think at a higher level than the way we might have thought for the last 5 Januaries. And Kahneman talks about system 1 thinking, which is easy, effortless thinking. For things to change, we need to do what he would call system 2 thinking, which is more effortful thinking. That's where we actually say, well, okay, that's how it was, but this is the way I want it to be. And so from there, we say, well, that's the story that it is now or was. What story do I want it to be? What do I want to see in my future? That's the first thing that needs to change, is we elevate our standard of thinking. That starts with awareness of, well, hang on now. If I don't change, it's not going to change. So the first thing is awareness. The second thing is deeper thinking. And the third thing is actions based on that thinking.
Yeah.
And also, and you and I were talking before about the future and a realization that, you know, we might assume that, well, our story is our company is not that successful, but the economy says it's going to grow 3% this year and 3% next year. The future has that plan for my business. That's not the way the universe works. I've learned that the future has nothing planned for me. So if I see a story that I want in my future, if it's going to be, I have to make it happen. I remember a football team once, a chairman of a football team who won a big game, and he stood up and he said, the future has great things planned for this team. And inside my head quietly, I was thinking, no, it doesn't. The future doesn't have anything planned for that team. Either we make it happen or it doesn't happen. So also maybe that realization that, if we want a new story in our heads, the only thing that might be stopping us is ourselves. But that unless we actually do it, well, then we're going to keep getting the same story.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely get to that. And as you're talking about that, I was just thinking about, you were talking about how people decide this is the year I'm going to get fit. This is the year I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to triple my business and what have you. And then oftentimes it doesn't happen. When it comes to stories that people try to define where, if you're honest, it was never going to happen. Are there commonalities, are there cautions, are there pitfalls that you see that maybe might be helpful?
So just tell me a little bit more about that, Eamonn.
Well, so for example, let's say, and this would be a common Eamonnism. So my wife calls them proclamations.
This should be good. Okay, I like this.
Yeah, so I say, right, so next month I'm going to do A, B, and C. Now, I haven't really thought my way through. Well, let's say it's the start of the year. So this is the year where I'm going to get back to being 165 pounds, whatever. And you work hard at that. You think you're doing things on the right way. You've got this picture in your head. And you don't even have to wait for 10 minutes for the other team to get a score against you. Sometimes you just get to a point where you say, I don't know that this is achievable. So I guess my question, and it's a long-winded way of getting to it, is about setting pictures of how things could be that are more within your compass, that will push you, but are more within your compass.
Yeah, one thing I speak about is underselling and overperforming, whereas a lot of us tend to oversell and underperform.
Yeah.
And, I've gone from being pathologically fearful of public speaking to thankfully making it a business. I've gone from no fitness to being, quite fit or maybe very fit. But how I got there, Eamonn, was I used the analogy of a swimming pool. And every swimming pool or most swimming pools certainly have a shallow end and a deep end. And very often when people set goals, they set deep end goals. But they set deep end goals in a swimming pool that they've never swam in before.
Yeah.
And so with the public speaking, maybe the level I'm at is I started in the shallow end because I had no skills in this arena. So I started in the very, very shallow end. And I've slowly inched myself down to the pool. Another simple example is somebody that says, I want to save $10,000. And you might ask them, well, how much have you ever saved before? I've never saved before. So now they want to save 10,000. My strategy then would be, well, show me evidence for 3 months that you can save $100 every month, without fail. Because if we can't do that, well, then we're very unlikely to be able to save $10,000. So that's where I talk about underselling and overperforming. And maybe you might learn skills in saving $100 a month that will support you in then being able to bring it to a higher level. The opposite tends to happen. It's like when people say, I'm going to lose 4 stone in weight. They're very committed, very motivated, very keen to jump on that path. They lose a stone in the first month, but then they hit a bit of a wall, and maybe their motivation or their confidence takes a big hit, and they ended up coming off the goal, and because they now feel like they failed, they put back on the stone or the 14 pounds and another 6 or 7 pounds on top of it.
Yeah.
What I encourage people in that situation is, listen, maybe keep the bigger goal under wraps, but maybe just announce a more modest target, go and get clear evidence that you can do that, maybe like to lose a half a stone or 7 pounds or 14 pounds, and then maybe announce a more ambitious target. Undersell and overperform, I find, is a better way to go.
No, I love that. I think that's great advice. And speaking of advice, and you've been given great advice so far, for those who need to motivate the other team members or people maybe in cross-functional situations, or maybe people not even in their organizations, and they're trying to set out a picture of how things could be, do you have any specific advice to those people about stories that motivate others, either out of direct examples or just observation?
Yeah, I think storytelling, and I know it's part of your business, and I know you and I were at a talk a lady called Kendra Hall gave about the value and the impact.
Yeah.
So the impact and the value of storytelling in your companies. And just if we have a vision, it's all very well saying, this is where we want to get to. But if you paint a vision of what success will look like for this company and you tell it through the form of a story. So I'm in my office now, and on my shelf here, I've got a series of books by a man called Patrick Lencioni. And they're all business books, but every book is a story. He comes up with a problem that a company might have. So, for example, a company that has a dysfunctional team, and he tells a story where he brings the challenge to life, and then the strategy of how to fix it. It's all in the story. And Lencioni's books are incredibly... Like I've listened to them all. He's actually written, I think, 11 books. But every book is a story, and every book is a business book. But he sees the impact and the value of telling it through a story, because, Eamonn, we've been listening to stories since probably almost the first day that we came alive.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, and we never, I don't think there's a human being in the world that isn't gravitated towards stories. So why don't we use them in a corporate setting? Because people are drawn to them. Why do so many professional speakers get their messages through stories? Because they help people to see what success looks like, to see what getting beyond the point of pain is, to see how people might be able to help themselves get to a better place. If we can help them see it and then give them strategies to get there. First of all, let them see it, then give them ways that if you do these three things, but if they can see it, they're far more likely to use the 3 or 4 or whatever number of ideas you might give them to help them bring the story to life. That's the impact of storytelling.
Yeah, I love it, Gerry, because actually you've heard me saying this before, but the truth is about story that if you can see it, if you can connect it, you can remember it. Yeah, so I love that. That's a great way in which to finish it. Gerry, can I just thank you for being an awesome guest today? Much appreciated.
Delighted to be here, Eamonn. Thank you.
Yeah, and for people who'd like to know more about you, where can they go to find out more about you and goal setting and getting?
Sure. So I've a website which has the word academy at the end of it. So it's my name, Gerry, spelled with a G, GerryDuffyAcademy.com.
Perfect. Good. Well, thank you, Gerry. And thank you also, our listeners, for listening in today to the Corporate Storytellers Club podcast, the place for insights on stories that inspire. And here's to your memorable stories.